Joey's on cold medication.
A little sniff of Afrin right before you got here.
I should have. You're only supposed to do that stuff twice a day here.
I know. I think it's highly addictive.
I can see why.
And then he giggles real loud.
Yeah, because when I was like, I have never used it, or I was a kid when I used it last. So people were like, hey, you got the sinus thing, so you should use the Afrin. And so I get the Afrin and I use it, and immediately I can breathe out of my nose.
Yep.
Now I still sound like this,
right?
But I can breathe out of my nose.
Yeah.
And I can pronunciate a little better.
Pronunciate? Are you kidding?
That's how you pronounce it, right?
Pronunciate? Is that right? Pronunciation.
Yeah.
But
when you
wouldn't
pronunciate something,
pronounce.
It's just
something.
pronounce.
Hold
Like
on.
pronunciate is not a word.
All right, let's see.
I didn't argue. I was like, no, that sounds 100% correct.
I might be wrong. That didn't sound right in my ear.
Well, it may not have been a word last week.
I don't like it when people say the word commentate.
Commentate.
It's not
the act
commentate.
or way of pronouncing a word or words.
It's pronunciate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, interesting. But I think it's like that. Like it probably wasn't a word at one point, and then it got used so much that it was eventually added.
Is pronunciate a real word?
It's also known as
Pronunciate is not a word.
Could not care any less.
Pronunciate is not a word. It says it right here.
He went to the Urban Dictionary.
My,
It's different.
my Google says it's a word. Well, I X'd out of it now.
Of course you did. It says pronunciate is not a word. Pronounce, pronunciation, and enunciate are words.
Enunciate. Uh-huh.
What did I say? What's the
You
word I made
said
up?
pronunciate.
Pronunciate.
It sounds real good.
It sounds.
It's kind of like this time. I got to tell a story. So, have I told you guys a story?
Well, you're going to have to tell us and for us to tell you if you told us.
We need a little more to go on.
Yeah, I was in my early,
Yep, you told us this.
Oh, coming in hot.
Lori's on
She's
fire.
coming in hot.
So I'm shoveling snow. It's middle of the night. Because my uncle had a landscaping company and a bunch of my friends and my dad were out. He was plowing, we were shoveling. And we were in the middle of DC, and this lady comes out and she is like yelling at us for making all this noise, trying to shovel like her neighborhood or shovel her apartment complex. And so I roll the window down because she's like all up in our, space, and she's like yelling. And I'm like, listen, lady, you're being real attackative.
And she started laughing at you.
Well, she did, and the whole car starts laughing at me, and it lightened the moment. Like everyone kind of calmed down. I'm like, I didn't get it. I was like, why is everyone laughing?
This is not funny right now.
Because my justice reflex kicked in.
Sure.
You don't yell at us this way.
Yeah.
Especially when we're trying to help.
And I made up the word attackative.
You do have a justice reflex.
Oh, man. All right.
I just need to hear you say pronunciate is not a word. He can't do it. He can't do it.
No. It's like Fonzie.
Hey, do you know that reference?
Okay.
Guys.
That was a long time ago, though. That was before I was born.
Sure.
Yeah.
That is true. Pronunciate a word. It's not a word. Pronounce, pronunciation. That's what you read. What did I say?
You said
It's
predestinate.
the back formation from pronunciation.
What's the back formation?
What does
I
that
was
mean?
hoping you would know.
A back formation?
Yeah. Pronunciate is a word that isn't listed in most dictionaries. Does mention it.
But it is a word. It said it's a word that is not in most dictionaries.
Yeah.
Just because Google
It can
says
be found
it's not.
on dictionary.com. So whether or not that's a accurate source, I don't know.
It can be found on dictionary.com.
It's like people who cite Wikipedia.
I mean, dictionary.com sounds pretty official.
Let's do a little game about what words you can find on dictionary.com.
So,
they,
here
you
you
know-
go. Some words are just mistakes that become words. That's what somebody posted. I'm okay with that. I think we can just stop
Okay.
the argument right there.
I actually love that. That's very fair.
Okay,
Some
I'm
words
okay
are
with
just
that.
mistakes that become words.
Okay. I can accept that.
Yeah. Totally checks
As long as it starts with Joey, that made a mistake.
Hey, babe. No, I'm currently recording a podcast.
Hi, Steph.
Everybody says hi. All right. Love you. Bye.
That's got to be our cold opening for the last one of the season.
Yeah, let's start there. All right, let's do it. That'll be it. That'll be it. All right. Well, we are finally landing the plane on the story of Joseph, the highs and lows of the story of Joseph, life of Joseph. And so we hope you've enjoyed it. It really has been a fascinating series, or just from 37 to now chapter 50. It opened my eyes. We're going to talk a little bit today about kind of the things that we've learned, but it really has opened my eyes to a lot of things, a lot of biblical principles, a lot of theological principles as we've studied it and as we've learned in it. And so just kind of as we've always done, we will go through a little bit of text, and then we'll kind of just unpack it and see what's in there for us to learn and grow. Anything before we actually jump in that you guys want to just say?
Are we going to pretend like you're not all stuffy and having a sinus infection?
Okay, let's address that.
Let's talk about that.
It actually sounds better today.
Yeah.
This time on Monday, a couple days ago, we weren't sure this was going to happen. It was that bad.
No, because I came in on Monday, and I don't know what happens, the connection between like your nose and your throat and your mouth, where you have to pronunciate. I did it again. Pronounce words.
Enunciate.
Enunciate. Can I say pronounce words?
Yes.
Or enunciate. So that's what I do. I mix those two things together. Why don't we just have a word that mixes those two things together?
We do now. Some things are just mistakes that become words.
It's true.
All right. Yeah. And so now a little bit of medicine, a little bit of
Yeah,
Afrin.
you sound better.
Can I say Afrin? Afrin's legal.
I think.
Right?
Yeah.
Afrin's legal.
Yes, and of course you checked that before you took it.
Oh, of course.
I mean, I think the assumption was I'm buying it at a store, i.e.
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
legal.
Yeah.
Ergo.
It's legal. Yeah.
It's like the one episode where I said, you know, when you pull off something illegal.
You said, you know when you commit a crime?
Yeah, you remember?
Yeah.
And Jeff and I looked at each other like, I mean, no.
Odd time to confess that. Keep talking. All right, so Stone Joey. Let's go.
Oh, goodness. All right. Well, here we go.
So if Joey sounds funny.
Joey
Yeah,
sounds funny.
exactly.
Because he's hopped up on Afrin.
Yeah, well, it does. It definitely does help. It definitely clears the nostrils, at least. So here we go. You guys wanted to know all of that.
Nose connected to the throat to the mouth.
Yep, all those connections.
All those connections.
You picture it.
So we said we were going to start at the end of chapter 49 with the events there. So Genesis chapter 49, we kind of had this moment. We covered all the chapters last week, 46, 47, 48, 49. And this is where those chapters were all about Jacob in the process of dying. Mm-hmm. And then so finally at the end of 49, he finally dies.
Yep.
And then the turn into 50 is his burial. And it's a very, first of all, it's a mourning that takes place. So they, I guess it was Egyptian culture that had them mourn for 70 days or 72 days, I think was the official mourning period for someone of that class.
Yeah.
And he was probably renowned because he was Joseph's father and all that kind of stuff amongst
I do think it was more because of Joseph, right, than
yeah.
Jacob. I did see that in Egyptian culture at that time, there was 40 days of embalming and
Okay.
then 70 days of mourning.
Wow, what a process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you have this really elaborate sort of kind of burial that takes place. And then, yeah, go ahead.
There was one little interesting factoid nugget thing there at the beginning of chapter 50, is that Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to do it, which made it a medical operation and not a religious embalming. So for the priest, which is who would typically do an embalming for the Egyptians, had they done it, it could have been a representation of a
of their
religious
culture
ritual
and
for
their-
them versus just a medical thing that was going to honor what Jacob had asked, which was carry my bones back with you.
Yeah.
I thought that was really
that's
interesting.
Cool.
That,
Sure.
Just that distinction.
yeah, that Joseph's not even just thinking about right then. He's thinking about
Yeah.
what happens when we
Whenever.
go back.
Whenever,
I
yeah.
want to make sure we honor him. I want to make sure that it's done right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good.
Continuing to do the right thing.
No, that's good because I wrote that a couple other places where the players in chapter 50 are still kind of acting the way they've always acted,
Yeah.
including the brothers, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But and yet in that you still see growth in some ways for the brothers, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Joseph still acting like Joseph, responsible, planning, thoughtful, that kind of thing. I read an interesting note from a commentator on verse 4. It says, "And when the days of the weeping for him were past," Joseph was definitely a weeper. Man, he liked to weep.
He's tender.
He what?
He's tender.
He was tender.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That was the nice way to put that. So,
He's a big baby.
Mushy.
I expect more of that out of you two.
Yeah.
Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh. Interesting kind of note. I don't know what this commentator said was that this wasn't just a mere storyteller. That this was like someone must have wrote this down that Moses got from that was an eyewitness account. Because it didn't say they spoke to Pharaoh; it spoke to Pharaoh's household, and so it was a detail to him that thought maybe something must have been, I guess maybe it was proof or apologetic that this isn't just some fairy tale story; that this was like an eyewitness account that was maybe passed down.
Yeah, they passed down because Moses would have been 300 years later. So I would think they probably wouldn't have been. But yeah, I mean that's interesting to think about. I mean this whole thing. I mean there's a lot of
detail,
detail here. So it wasn't. It probably had a bit of a not folklore, folktale kind of vibe to it, just because the story's being passed down, kind of thing. But it had to originate somewhere. You know what I mean?
It's oral history. All of. I mean.
Oral. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, for sure. So then he goes to the household and asks to do the whole burial thing, and then does. It was interesting too. No burial in the scriptures were as honorable as this one. The rest of the Bible, like this one, just kind of took up a lot of real estate for Jacob.
It really does. If you think about how much real estate it takes up versus, sometimes we jump from one chapter to the next, and it's been 20 years, and yet these 70 days are really detailed.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is a huge moment in the history of Israel. One of the things that I had printed out was just sort of was this longevity life chart from Adam to Joseph, and so you had Noah, and there's a little discrepancy on this, but I think for the most part, most people agree that Noah was alive at the same time as obviously then Shem and then Abraham, and that there's Abraham obviously had some overlap, and then Isaac and Jacob. So Jacob's grandfather in the history of the world went all the way back to Noah and the flood. And so aunts and uncles of Jacob's was washed up in the flood.
That's cool.
Just to think about that. And so now with Jacob's death, moving into Exodus, you have a brand new...
Right. There's a page turn, literally.
Yeah, a page turn for the story of Israel. So not only for the nation, but us as readers, as we read this and as you end Genesis, you think through, wow, this is a big page turn for the history of Israel. Okay, so then you kind of move on, and then you have Joseph returning. This is the interesting part where I had about the brothers, verse 15. So Joseph returns, and then when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us or pay us back for all the evil that we did." So they thought, that he would turn on them, and basically, now that Jacob's gone, he doesn't have to play nice anymore. And so... So then they say to Joseph, "Please forgive the transgression of the brothers and their sin."
Actually, they say, "Our dad said for you to do that."
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No, it says your father.
Right. Your father, not even our dad.
Yeah.
Right.
Your father
Yeah.
said that you should forgive me. Because I wrote in my notes, did he?
Yeah.
Because there is no record of that.
Right.
There's been a lot of detail provided. That detail was not. You would think that important conversation might have shown up somewhere. So I just think they're continuing to try to manipulate the situation, which is not unlike their father.
Right.
We talked about that on the last episode a little bit, I think, is just, that marked him throughout his life. Everything, most of what he had was it was a consequence of something he had done or his mom had put him up to or whatever the case may be. But they come by it honest.
And as a result of that, I feel like his kids kind of live in fear. They are fearful.
Always looking over their shoulder.
Yep, 100%. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean that. That detail just stuck out to me. Like, did he say that?
That's really good because I think what'll happen, and again, I always point this out when I see this in commentaries because they're doing their job. They're studying the text and they're trying to pull out the meaning and meaning. There's my how to pronounce things.
Good catch.
You saw that?
Yeah, I did.
But they're like, they were humble and they were contrite and this was their confession and it was like very black and white. And I'm like, I read it a little differently.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, we just went through an exercise where you pointed out that they said your father gave this command. You know,
Right.
and so again, like it doesn't have. Both things can be true. Like maybe in their character,
Right.
of who they were afraid of consequence. That could be true, and also it led them to a place where they're genuinely want something from Joseph.
Yeah. Well,
favor.
This all goes back to Jacob having a favorite. And it wasn't them.
Right.
You know, and so they orchestrated a situation so that the one that was the favorite is out of the way. They probably didn't consider that even if he picks another favorite, it probably won't be me because there's like 11 of us.
Right.
Right. You know what I mean? It's like, but they just kept piling on decision after decision, action after action. And you get to the end here, and they're still just using dad as a ploy to get what they want.
Yeah.
Right.
At the end of the day.
Right.
Because
Right.
it's like, well, dad's dead. Let's get one more favor out of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
We never do stuff like that. They did. They did.
Well, then you see Joseph's response. So, shocker, he wept when they spoke to him.
What'd you say? There were 7 times? Is that what you said?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for I am in the place of God." Now, it's interesting that he says that because he really does have all the power right now. He can make their lives miserable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And yet, he doesn't have a human perspective. He doesn't have a power trip. He through the eyes of the Lord, spiritual eyes, he says, "Hey, I'm not God. I'm not the one that needs to bring this." And then he goes on with this famous line, right? Famous verse. Before you want to get there,
Yeah,
go
because
ahead.
I was really struck by the language of, "Am I in the place of God?" Because he did. To me, it seemed like Joseph did have the right toward retribution. Like, they deserved it. His brothers deserved it. He did have the right to do that,
Right.
but he realized it wasn't his place. And I think sometimes I'm gonna do a Joey here where we jump to application, but I think sometimes we forget that. Like, I sometimes do have the right to react the way I am, but it's not my place.
Right.
And so something about that word place really just humbled me a little bit, because I can get a little bit like, but I do
Yeah.
have the right. Let me show you
Yeah.
all the reasons I have the right.
What is our
But
responsibility in being wronged? Like what do we do? And like I think we could model a little bit of what how Joseph responds here, right?
Yeah.
I remember Brad has said this before, where sometimes, I mean, he's sort of joking about like him and Courtney will say to him, "I'm just going to give you up to the Lord," or something like that, you know.
Let the Lord take care of that.
Yeah, let the Lord take care of that, right? Like there is some of that, but it can't be just with words. It's got to be like a heart posture, where you're like, okay, like I don't know that I can change this person, you know, but
I think
Yeah.
I would argue it has to do with place. Like, what is my place in this situation?
Right.
Even if I have the right to prove that I've been wronged,
yeah, right,
is it my place? And what would it accomplish?
right,
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, I'm sure if we look long enough, we can find something. I mean, we're definitely told to advocate for others, whether it's their rights, for protection, safety, that sort of thing. But Romans 12, repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, as far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay. So it seems like when it comes to ourselves, if someone doesn't stand up to defend us, you know what I'm saying? I'm not
Yeah.
saying, you know, there are times that you guys take up yourself. So,
Sure.
yeah, you know, so don't over listen to what we're saying, or don't hear what we're not saying. But it seems like there is a aspect of trust. And I think, again, it's not a black or white. It's a kind of a gray wisdom issue. Is this an opportunity for me to trust God with my circumstances?
Yeah.
Or is this something that I need to stand up and say something
Yeah,
about?
right.
Or is God put someone else here to fight the battle for me or something like that?
And I think in all of it, there should be a reconciliation mindset, a redemptive mindset in it. You know, because I know we kind of joked about it off air a little bit, but like when I'm in a situation where we joke about my justice reflex, there is I am attempting a resolution. I'm not just speaking my mind.
Right.
I'm not just saying, "Hey, you wronged somebody or me." It's like, "Hey, there's a solution to this. Let's be reasonable in
Right.
figuring out a solution to it. So it's a redemptive kind of mindset.
Yeah, because even if you look at Matthew 18, I mean, that's a clear instruction on when it's time to say something. If someone has sinned against you,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So it is okay to say something. It's okay
Right.
to work for, but the purpose is reconciliation, not retribution.
Being right and
Right.
retribution right.
Well, and I would point out that the verse that you read in Romans 12 comes right after we are commanded not to be conformed to the world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our mind.
Right.
And so I think a lot of times we have to be sure that that is part of our posture as well. Is I don't want to do this the way the world would do it.
Right.
If I am going to seek justice, and usually for you, Joey, it's you are seeking justice for others. It's not usually you.
Right.
But even in that, it's,
Yeah.
have I been, am I looking like the world in how I'm doing this?
Sure.
Or am I looking transformed by the power of the Spirit in how I do this?
Yeah, since we're over in Romans 12, let's keep reading right there. It says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. So by doing, you will heap burning coals on his head, right? Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. But then you have to keep reading to 13. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. And that shoots us right back to
Right
Genesis
back to
50.
Joseph. That's right.
That is perfect, yeah. And I really, it's interesting how Joseph could have in his practice and maybe in his heart that theology written by Paul in Romans 12 here in Genesis chapter 50. Because look what he says.
Well,
yeah,
okay,
go ahead.
sorry.
go ahead.
No. I just think, sometimes we get hung up on that. Joseph didn't have the text,
Yeah, right.
but he had the truth.
Yeah, that's right.
And the text is truth. The
Yeah.
text is just,
Yeah.
words that are truth. So he didn't have the text, but he did have
That's
the
right.
truth. God's truth has been there forever.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. That's really well said.
Well, she got fired up right there.
Yeah, she
Well,
was
I
not
do.
gonna let you-
I do.
That's good. And
Sorry.
yeah, that was great. Verse 20, as for you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. This is,
That's thick set of words.
oh, it's so, yeah.
So much.
And I think what it shows here, and then he goes on, we'll come back to it, don't worry. But so do not fear. So now what? So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus, he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Trusting in the counsel and the truth that Lori just talked about, the truth of God, trusting in those things, believing in those things, moved Joseph to show love, forgiveness, and compassion. And we've talked about this ad nauseum before, but good orthodoxy should equal
This
good
is why theology
orthopraxy.
matters.
This is why
Right.
theology-
Like if you
yeah.
don't have a good theology of who God is, how God is, what God does, that
Yeah.
sort of thing, then you don't have the ability to say what Joseph said right here with any integrity.
That's right.
At all, because what he's talking about right there are two theological buckets.
Yeah.
Well, I guess one bucket that kind of contains the other one, but God's sovereignty. I love the way Piper finds sovereignty is it's God's right and power to do all that he decides to do. So God decided to bring Joseph there.
Yeah.
Now God's providence, which is a word that we throw around sometimes we don't really think about, it literally means kind of the root of that word is the word provide. So it's God taking the steps to ensure that what he has decided to happen is going to happen.
That's right.
So God is not, outside of our circumstances. He may be outside of time, but he's not removed from our circumstances. In fact, he's intimately involved
Yep.
with them, maybe even help
Providing.
them bring them about because at the end of the day, his name's on the line. So Joseph doesn't have anything to worry about.
Yeah.
But that is good theology that predates
Yeah, right.
any, like we were saying a while ago, like the truth has always been there.
Yeah.
We just didn't start writing it down real good for a long time.
Write it down real good.
I know, wasn't that good?
That was a Baytown special right
Baytown, go to Baytown, baby.
And so when he said that statement, hopefully I can do this pretty quickly, but this is what wouldn't, if the brothers never sold him into slavery, okay, he would have never gone to Egypt. And if he never went to Egypt, he would have never been sold to Potiphar. And if he was never sold to Potiphar, Potiphar's wife would never have falsely accused him. And if Potiphar's wife never falsely accused him, then Joseph would never be put in prison. And if he was never put in prison, then he would never met the baker and the butler. And if he never met the baker and the butler, he would never interpret dreams. Lori's laughing at
All
me.
I can think of is if you give a mouse a muffin. Okay, but keep going.
If Joseph never interpreted dreams, he would never have interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. He'd never interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. He would have never become prime minister and the second in command in Egypt. If Joseph never became the prime minister or the governor, he would have never wisely prepared for the terrible famine. And if he'd never prepared for the famine, his family would never be back in Canaan, would have died from the famine, and so on. And then he even goes forth to say, then Israel would have ceased to exist, and then there'd be no Messiah, and the end. So,
And no Roundtable podcast.
and hey, look at that. Let's keep that going.
All comes together.
So I thought that was an interesting list to kind of see it all out, what he meant by Genesis 20.
Yeah.
I love that. I love to think about, are we coming back to this or
Yes,
not?
please.
I love to think about the kind of the immediate good in that statement. It's what you just did.
Right.
The big picture is that there's immediate good that came out of the statement about, it was to save many people alive.
Yeah.
It was right then. But the many people
Wow.
alive
Wow.
is
Wow.
us.
Yep.
It's huge. It gets all the way down to
Yep.
Israel wouldn't have existed and there wouldn't have been a Messiah that came out of it. So
Wow.
that's fun, I think, to think about the now and the not yet.
Totally.
It's big.
It is big because I thought about, even the number of 70 that came with Jacob, and now it's going to grow to 180,000 to then beyond. I mean, when you just think about all the ramifications, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And, then the skeptic will say, well, couldn't God do it any other way? Yeah,
Sure.
Absolutely.
Right.
But
the only way we know for sure is that he chose not to.
Right.
And so
Right.
we don't know why.
Yeah.
And so, apply that to your circumstances, our circumstances. Could God allow us to grow and be changed in other ways? Sure, he could.
Yeah.
But somehow, if we believe, again, this is where our theology of who God is, what God does, why God does it, matters so much for how we understand the world. This is how we form our worldview as believers, is I can assume two things are true at once. God could have done it another way. God chose to do it this way. Therefore, God must have decided this was the best way.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I have to like it or appreciate it now, but at some point, just like Joseph, maybe I'll understand it if I continue to be faithful and follow what the Lord has in front of me.
And to me, you just illustrated the difference between sovereignty and providence. His sovereignty is, does he have the power and right to do it? Yep. Could he have done it some other way? Yeah, because he's sovereign. But in his providence, in the wisdom that he understands that we can't possibly even wrap our hands around, in his providence, his wisdom said, we're doing it this way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good. Really good. Then the chapter it's really interesting. I would have wrote this a little differently. I mean, if it was me, like that's why I love God's word, because it's like he explains things that we don't think is relevant to explain, but then it's really, really cool. And then he just says, okay, and Joseph dies.
You didn't like that?
I don't like that.
I like that.
Yeah, Joseph was this huge figure. Jacob gets all this real estate, and then it's like, and Joseph ceases to exist. And then, then we know what happens 400 years later. When he finally, is that when his bones were finally carried back? Was 400 years later? Yeah.
I thought 300. I thought it was 400, but every commentary I said saw said 300.
Not me. Mine said about 400.
400.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Have to update my Logos.
There was so much cool stuff sort of in that last little bit, just kind of because he repeats the Abrahamic covenant before he dies.
That's good. Yeah.
Which I thought was so cool.
Yeah.
And he makes them promise to take his bones back. And I just thought that was so cool. Just this whole concept of that Joseph died looking forward to just this unfolding plan of redemption that he believed was going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, why else would he say, take my bones into Egypt? I mean, again, he's looking forward into what God is going to do in whatever circumstances he has.
It is a sign
and I
of his
thought that was
just enduring faith and just, I love that.
Yeah, and one of the things, here's kind of just a fun thing to do as you read the Bible, is when you see a predictive prophecy like that, look and see if it was fulfilled. I mean, you don't even have to do it with stuff like this. It's hundreds of years. You can look in the book of Acts. When Jesus told them to go into all the world and blah, 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 blah. Look and see in the book of Acts, was this fulfilled?
Yep.
And if not in the book of Acts, did it continue on? Well, if you look at this, it's like, did Joseph ever go back to?
He did.
Exodus 13:19, Moses carried his bone 400 years later.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, okay. And you start to see it all connect. But that's a fun thing to do as you see prophecy in Scripture.
You know what somebody pointed out as I was doing some study was just the fact that Joseph was actually not buried like his fathers were. He was in a coffin. The Bible actually, makes a point to say they embalmed him and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. And just the idea that coffin was a reminder to people for
Yeah.
400 years
Wow.
of this is not it.
Yep.
This is not it.
Yep.
This is not it. We are not home.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just see all the big
Yeah.
picture, super cool stuff.
Yeah, that is really good. That is really good. Well, guys, as we kind of put a wrap on the highs and lows in the life of Joseph, I've learned a lot. I think I kind of said this. I've been really encouraged personally by this. I think I've used it multiple times in some different counseling situations,
too.
you know, where people are telling me things that are going on in their life and they're kind of asking the question, why? And then you just kind of see, you know, this life story here by Joseph, and you realize, man, like the Lord is at work. And do you trust that he is at work in your life, even when you feel like it's not going the way you would have done it, or your story is not going the way you would have written it?
Yeah.
You know, and just, it's been a real, like, I know I've said this before, but to read devotionally is really, really good. And then to really study something like we get to do, it's a privilege to do this for the round table, that it really blesses us. It blesses me. And then I get to come here and sit and talk about it. And so, yeah, it's been really good. What about y'all?
Just a tag on sort of to what we were just talking about. And I may be saying the exact same thing I just said, but I glanced over at Hebrews 11, which is the Hall of Faith chapter. And honestly, I couldn't remember if Joseph was in it or not.
Yeah.
Because there's a bunch of names, and
Yeah,
you know Abraham
sure.
is, you know, anyway. And he is. And I hope I don't have feelings while I'm talking about this. I'm feeling like
Oh boy.
teary voice coming up. But he is in there, and it's in verse 22, and it says, by faith Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. And I felt kind of disappointed. I was like, what?
He did a lot more than that.
Yes, right. I'm not kidding you. It was
Yeah.
like he had such a dramatic life of faith.
Yeah.
Think about all the drama we have
Yeah.
talked about in these last weeks.
Right.
Why is that what is written in Hebrews 11? And I really did get a little teary thinking about, because there's no more evidence that Joseph trusted God's plan.
Yeah.
Then
Right.
thinking back to his great-great-grandfather Abraham saying, I believe.
Yeah.
What was counted to him as righteousness, let it be true of me, right? Like, let me be singing when the evening comes, right? All of those kind of things. So that was really big for me just this week as I studied, was I can do some dramatic things in my faith, perhaps, here, right now on this earth, but what do I really want to be my legacy? I want it to be that I say, take my bones out of this place to the place where God promised. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great,
good.
Lori. Yeah.
Nothing to add, honestly. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you guys said it.
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, I think there's so many principles, you know, integrity in the midst of temptation, you know, just the whole integrity thing. I think just for his long faithfulness, going, you know, daily in the right direction kind of thing. Just trusting that God is bigger and more all-knowing and more all-powerful than you are, and that you can trust whatever is in store for your life. I think we read a lot about forgiveness and life change in the life of Judah, even towards the end of Jacob's life, even though we called him a big baby, you know, he did have some heart change as well. That was encouraging to me. I remember there was one episode and there was one moment when we were talking about Judah and his confession and his kind of path change. And then to see that Jesus was going to come from that line is like, it was just really neat to just, you see redemption stories, you hear about redemption stories, and then sometimes they just hit really close to home. And so that's been really, really encouraging. Every story of every page of the Bible, this is my final takeaway, tells a story of a big God, you know, period, really. But,
End. Full stop.
yeah. And I think, again, it just is an encouragement to those who listen that I know that I can jump to application, and I know that we can, you know, as we create content, you know, we think, what is in it for us, or what's in it for me? And what's in it for us is we have a beautiful, wonderful, good God who loves us, loves you, and really does want you to be made in the image of his son, to believe, to trust, and to glorify him with your life while you are here on this earth. And so we would just encourage you in that as you are kind of walking through whatever you're walking through, and as hard as it might be, whatever highs and lows you might be experiencing. Joseph knew it, and Joseph really believed in this God and his life showed it. So anyway, that's all I got.
That's the season.
That's it. The highs and lows of Joseph.
It's funny. As much as I griped, I'm actually going to miss Joseph a little bit. But good thing he's still there.
So,
I was about to say
even
that.
when we're not recording a season, you could read about him. In fact, if you choose to, there's a great podcast you should listen to go along with it. It's really good. It'd be a great small group study for somebody.
Hey, yeah, it's a good
I'm
idea.
gonna miss him.
I'm going to miss him. I don't know how long we're going to be off, but we're going to be off for a little bit. Go back and listen to previous episodes if you're just now finding us. Our next episode will be episode 100. So tune in or just figure out when that's going to be. Follow us on social, Equip Austin Ridge, and obviously share with your friends. We do have hats and t-shirts. So contact us, equip@austinridge.org if you like one of those. Thanks for joining us this season. We really appreciate y'all. And until next time, bye-bye.